And the reason that we have undetermined is a lot of times it's not because they don't know what happened. It's because there is equal evidence for different manners of death. For example, sometimes you have somebody that their death, there's a ton of evidence that says that this could be a suicide, but there's also a bunch of evidence that says this death could have been an accident. And so because like those scales are so close, the pathologist can't call it. And so they'll say, well, yeah, this death was clearly due to, motor vehicle accident, blunt force trauma secondary to a motor vehicle accident. But when it comes to manner, was it an accident? Was it a suicide? They can't say for certain. And so they'll say that the manner is undetermined. And that can be a hard one because when people see undetermined on a death certificate, they think it means we don't know what happened. And in reality, sometimes undetermined means that there's too much evidence. There's too much indicating this, and there's also too much indicating that, so it can't be weighed.
That is really no. That is.
I don't know if that answered the question.
No, that did actually. That's really interesting. We've definitely speculated before, Casey and I, of oh, the manner of death is undetermined. Clearly, this means that there was definitely not enough evidence or something, or oh, clearly someone didn't do enough investigating. How do they not know? That makes a lot of sense.
It's a misinterpretation of what undetermined means. And a lot of times undetermined is a good thing because it's easier to change a death certificate. It's easier to change a manner from undetermined to homicide than it is to change a death certificate from suicide to homicide. Or, it's like putting undetermined on a death certificate is almost like putting a placeholder in that spot and saying, the information doesn't support anything, doesn't support any of these manners of death conclusively. And so we're putting undetermined here. So if more information comes to light later on, we can come back and change it.
That makes so much more sense. Oh my gosh. That was like a light bulb clicking on for me. That literally.
Yeah, I had one of those cases.
So much sense.
My last shift, we had one of those cases. We had a death that it's just this person has a whole bunch of history of they've suicide attempts in the past, but the way that this transpired doesn't really track with a suicide. So it might actually be an accident. And the pathologist is going to mark the manner as undetermined.
That's really, really interesting.
And it's important to note that we always say this, autopsies are not a silver bullet. It's like people think, well, if we get an autopsy, then we're going to get all the answers and we're going to know what happens. And
very untrue.
I would say that I might be overestimating, but in some autopsies, the cause of death is simply not there. It's like Science is imperfect. Sometimes you just don't know.
Wow.
Yeah. And it sucks because it's just sort of we don't know why this person is dead,
Well,
and it's
so much
our abilities, our capabilities are finite, and a lot of times, how well a medical examiner's office does depends entirely upon what kind of resources they have. Are they fully staffed? Do they have enough, do they have enough available to them to do this job? And unfortunately, a lot of times the answer is no.
That's true.
And so it's not that, people are being lazy. It's that, politics and administration stand in the way of creating a medical examiner's office that can function well.
That makes a lot of sense. It's just, it's funny. I say that about stuff all the time. I literally just said, I wish people understood it wasn't like TV as much. But when you take it and you apply it, like, science isn't perfect. Like, yes, I know that. I am a scientist. I know that science isn't perfect. But when you take it and then apply it to the true crime cases that I sit here and talk about in my free time, I'm like, oh, why didn't you apply that before? Duh.
Well, yeah, it's like, for example, you think about it. If somebody has a sudden heart dysrhythmia, and I don't know, I mean, I don't want to assume anything about the listenership, but it's like, if you have a heart dysrhythmia, there won't be any physical sign of it at autopsy, because that is a misfiring of the internal conduction system of your heart. And the only way to diagnose a dysrhythmia is to catch it as it happens on an EKG. Yeah. And so people can die of dysrhythmias, and we open them up and it's just sort of like, well, looks like a heart, know?
Man,
yeah. Yeah. And so it's like they kind of have to cobble together. It's like, okay, well, we know that this person had, a history of heart issues, or they had cardiomyopathy. And so it's reasonable to think that they probably had a heart dysrhythmia, but there's no physical finding.
That's
just one example of like certain things that just don't leave marks.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That leads me into my next question about how many people do you think are poisoned out there? Like, how many cases do you think you get that are like, you said, yeah, those cases are like 1 in a million about criminal minds, but what if people are just better at murder than we thought? Like, what if they're all poisonings and we just don't have the money to do the lab tests to determine that they're poisoning?
Dude, I live in fear of that thought. If we, and that's just it. It's like, I don't know.
The questions that keep you awake at night.
It's true. I mean, I absolutely, it's like, I'll look at things and, because like a family member said something that struck me as being weird, or, it's like, 2 years later, I'm still sitting here thinking about it going, God, was that actually, no.
Those cases,
no, I'm smart.
Though,
I'm good at my job. It's like, and the thing is, it's like, I honestly, I would like to think that doesn't escape our notice. We have a pretty good toxicology lab at the state police. And we have good pathologists who, if they can't find a cause and manner of death, at autopsy, and nothing is immediately obvious, they'll throw the book at it. They'll do every test there is. The important thing, though, is it's like they simply can't do every test there is on every death they have.
Yeah, and it's unreasonable to ask that they do that as well.
Yeah. And it's just like, I mean, God, so many times we get called and it's just like, I still remember this happened fairly recently. This guy is like, I am shocked that my father is dead. I'm shocked. And I'm just like, I'm looking at the case file and I'm like, dude, your dad was 92 years old. He had a pacemaker. He had Alzheimer's. He was on dialysis. I'm just like,
I love how it's like, oh, you missed the point there, buddy. Just right over your head.
And he was
right
on hospice, pal.
He was on hospice. Oh my God.
He was on hospice, and this guy was like outraged that his father died, and I'm just like, and he wanted all of this stuff done because he was certain that the care facility had, given the wrong medication, or, they left him alone too long or something like that. And you're just sort of like, we don't.
He had some mental health issues going on there.
Yeah. And I mean, you can't, you don't want to be a dick about it and be like, look, dude, get your shit together. This is not suspicious, and you have to handle those people with kid gloves, because you're just sort of like, okay, let's tug on this thread and see where it leads. And, usually you can kind of talk some sense into them, but sometimes people are just adamant that, Mima's death was a,
Murder.
cleverly hidden murder. And you're just like, oh, Jesus.
Fucking strangers on a train type bullshit.
Exactly. You're just like, oh, God, I don't know how to talk you off this ledge.
Should I get on the ledge with you? I don't know. Should we? I don't know.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, there are times where I'm just like, all right, fuck it, I'll listen,
Tell me
entertain
your
me. Where are we going
conspiracy
with
theory.
this?
I love it. Yes.
Yeah, sometimes.
Okay, so I've got a good one for you. It's from an author friend of mine, and it made me wonder what the heck they're writing because I crowdsourced some of these questions because I love that I love this podcast called Ologies. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It is by Allie Ward, and what she does is she interviews ologists about their ology, about like what makes it cool and what got them into it and what exactly it is. And
Great
blah,
name.
right. I was like, I kind of hate her for it. I'm like, oh God, I wish I came up with that. Like, that's fucking clever.
Right.
But it, I love that Allie Ward, crowdsources her questions that she asks her ologists. Some of them, and then she picks through the questions and decides which ones to ask. But I thought this one was really interesting, so I'm going to ask this one from my author friend, but it made me wonder what the heck they're writing, because they want to know what role do visceral fluids play in determining drug and alcohol levels at the time of death.
Oh my gosh. I would say that is more of a pathologist question. A lot of times, stomach contents are always examined, and sometimes they are preserved, like they're kept for a while.
Gross.
But what is in people's stomach is not as interesting to us as what is in their bloodstream.
So true.
Because like if it's it's like, okay, so you've got pill fragments in your stomach. What we're more interested in is how many of those pill fragments were metabolized, releasing that substance into your bloodstream, which is what will actually kill you.
That makes total sense.
So,
that's like a note to me right now. That's another light bulb right there.
So stomach contents are interesting. They can be helpful when it comes to like, when was the last time this person ate? And that can kind of help determine the time of death. But in terms of like toxicology, the golden standard for toxicology is qualitative blood and urine.
Yes.
Because it's like, we don't care if it's in their stomach, we care if it's in their bloodstream.
That makes total sense. That makes total sense. And as a lab tech, I should have known that answer and been able to answer that for her. Oh my gosh.
But I mean, it's definitely considered a significant finding if, you open up someone's stomach and they have pill fragments in there, because it means that person, they took those pills recently enough that they have not dissolved.
Yeah, I'm just going to move to the next question because that's a great one to leave that on. How often do you use scientific specimens or anatomical models, or do you just develop like a muscle memory? Then you're like, oh, this liver weighs like 10 ounces. Like I can't, it's a ball of bread dough. My friend, coincidentally named Morg, not kidding, that's her name, wanted me to ask this because when they were in college, they got to tour a local medical examiner's office, and they showed them this cabinet where they kept all these slides with like cells of various organisms on file. And she and I are both wondering, how often do you reference those? And also, do you, Grace, have an organ in a jar?
Okay. First question. So it's like I am not, because I'm not a pathologist. I have helped with autopsies, but I don't do autopsy. Like I've done like the autopsy tech position, which is a lot of, you do the Y incision, you pull out the organ block, you kind of like do all of the prep work for the pathologist to go through the organs one by one.